We're now joined for this story by two guests, our first being Dan Perry, an international affairs expert joining us from Tel Aviv, and our second being Jason Isaacson, who's the Chief Policy Officer at the AJC, and he's joining us from Washington, D.C. I first want to go to you, Dan. I want to start with this unprecedented move by President Trump. He's said that potentially he could be calling on Iran to join in the Abraham Accords. What's your analysis of this latest statement from President Trump, and what's your analysis of the possibility of Iran actually joining into the Abraham Accords? It would be unprecedented.
Well, it would be incredible, and I cannot see this Iranian government, this version of the Islamic Republic regime, agreeing to any such thing. But the move is creative and brazen. This is the very definition of pulling a rabbit out of a hat. And I must say, in terms of creative diplomacy, it's quite impressive. Trump doesn't get a lot of credit for brilliant strategic maneuvers, but if this works even a little bit, it not only might change the narrative of this war, which is currently one of frustrating failure, but also help Netanyahu in his upcoming election, which will in a way come as bad news to probably the majority of the people in Israel who really want him gone. But it changes things. Look, the landscape, as of yesterday or the day before, was that whereas it had been hoped that the war could end with surrender terms in which Iran gives up not only its nukes, but also its missiles and its proxy terrorist militias all over the region, and maybe even can be compelled to agree to democratic reforms. None of that was going to happen. They're going to open up the Strait of Hormuz, which had never been closed, in a situation where now it has been revealed as a huge source of potential Iranian blackmail going forward as well, in exchange for a deal on a nuclear program, which was roughly attainable before, and which is very similar to what President Obama arrived at in 2015, that Trump foolishly walked away from in 2018, inaugurating the current era of Iranian nuclear enrichment, which was one of the two reasons for the war, the other being that they massacred tens of thousands of protesters. So that's looking like a failure. And for Trump to have spun that into something that convinces enough Americans that it was worth the effort would have been difficult. But if somehow he persuades countries like Saudi Arabia that want the war over at this point to, get over themselves and just normalize with Israel, which has been a thing they've all been talking about for years now, then that is just electrifying. And it would really change things in the Middle East. So we'll see where it goes. But as diplomatic maneuvers go, this one is incredibly intriguing.
Indeed. Jason, I want to turn to you now. You're joining us from Washington, D.C., the political capital of the United States, of course. This move from President Trump could change, or as Dan mentioned, it could change the perception of the United States' success in this war, especially if an outcome of the negotiations would have such regional ramifications, such as these further countries joining on to the Abraham Accords. Jason, what is your analysis of the likelihood of these countries joining on to these accords as a way of potentially ending the war? And what's your assessment of a potential reaction inside the United States to this move from Donald Trump?
Well, thank you, Ruby. First of all, I agree with everything that Jan just said. This would be historic. It would remake the Middle East. It would remake the world, removing a source of enormous tension and conflict and misery for millions, hundreds of millions of people. If there were this spreading umbrella of peace and understanding, that's the fantasy that we all aim for. And that we hope to achieve step by step. And of course, there was very significant progress made in that direction just 5.5 years ago with the Abraham Accords. It it broke the mold. It made it seem all of a sudden possible that Israel could have full diplomatic relations and even security relations with countries with which it had been ostensibly, although not actually at war, but certainly at loggerheads in a confrontation that had lasted for decades. And there could actually be the possibility of peace spreading throughout the region. But that was then. We're in a different era now. The war in Gaza over the last 2.5 years has turned typically hostile populations even more hostile toward Israel. A lot of anger about Israel, about the way that the war was conducted. A lot of concern across the region about the war in Lebanon, even though the leaders across the region recognize that Israel had no choice but to do what it can to destroy the Hezbollah militia that has been firing missiles and drones into Israel. Nevertheless, populations are uniformly across this region hostile to Israel.
There's also been reports that on the call there was silence from some of the leaders of these countries, perhaps indicating how big of a political move it would be for them to make. But how will Iran react to these nations joining the Abraham Accords?
I don't think Iran's reaction is going to be particularly profound. They expected it in many cases already. It's not their concern. They're at loggerheads with these countries. I mean, these countries, whether or not they're eager to continue to have kinetic warfare against Iran, want the regime to fall. Iran knows that it faces, on a strategic level, near global opposition to everything about its regime, even though tactically some countries may oppose fighting it or may fear it. Certainly now that its leverage with asymmetric warfare has been so clearly manifested. But no, they're not going to react in any game-changing way to Saudi Arabia or even Qatar joining the Abraham Accords under whatever name. The idea, though, that the Iranian regime could make peace with Israel it seems to me to be a bridge of fantasy too far. There's no way. There are those that will tell you that, having proxy militias all over the region trying to spread jihad, death, and mayhem, that's part of their DNA. Maybe, certainly looks that way. Opposing Israel is obviously part of their DNA. It wouldn't be the Islamic Republic if they were to do such a thing. Moreover, it appears as if the junta that has organized itself, largely based on the IRGC, in Tehran post-decapitation in late February and early March of its previous leadership, is, if anything, more radical. On the other hand, they are collectively a bit of a cipher. We don't really know. We don't have a clear window into their thinking. We have all kinds of indications, and there's reports, and there's intel leaks, but we just don't know. I guess, perhaps, if there's any leverage that could be applied, it would be in the case of the sanctions and the frozen assets. Iran wants not just partial unfreezing and undoing of those two levers, but total. I doubt they'll get it, but on the other hand, they're acting like a country that thinks they have leverage because of the Strait of Hormuz and because of the obvious fear of the Gulf countries about being attacked at all, because their business model depends on Westerners doing business there without fear of being attacked. They do not have the Israelis' patience with sitting around bomb shelters. So the Iranians think they have leverage, and they're demanding this total undoing of the economic warfare against them. I can't see them getting that, but I suppose if it turns out that we're wrong about the nature of the current variant of the regime, and they are somewhat pragmatic, I could see some move in this direction, not normalization, but some move in this direction in exchange for a total end to their economic isolation. And that would be so spectacular an achievement for the regime that, who knows, maybe something creative might be organized, but it still seems to me to be rather far-fetched.
Very interesting development. Dan, thank you very much for joining us today on the program.